The afternoon sun hung heavy over the endless stretch of prairie grass, baking the earth until the air itself seemed to shimmer with heat. Elias Ward rode his mare at an easy pace, the leather of his saddle creaking with each step, a familiar sound that had become as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. The sack of oats tied behind him shifted slightly with the horse's movement, a reminder of his mundane trip to town that morning. At 32, Elias had grown accustomed to the solitude of his ranch near the railway tracks. The iron rails that cut through the landscape had brought change to this part of the territory. But for Elias, they were simply another feature of the land, like the scattered cottonwoods or the dry creek beds that filled only during spring rains. He'd chosen this spot precisely because few others wanted to live so close to the noise and smoke of the passing trains. The prairie stretched out before him in waves of golden brown, broken only by the occasional cluster of mesquite or prickly pear. Cicadas droned their endless song, a sound so constant it had become part of the silence itself. His mare, Buttercup, a name his late mother had given the animal years ago, picked her way carefully through the sparse vegetation, her coat dark with sweat. Elias pulled his hat lower against the sun's glare, thinking about the fence he needed to mend on the south pasture and whether Martha, his housekeeper, had managed to coax the old stove back to life. The woman was nearing 70 but refused to slow down, insisting she'd rather wear out than rust out. She'd been with his family since before Elias was born, and when his parents passed, she'd simply stayed on, as much a part of the ranch as the weathered barn or the well his father had dug 20 years prior. The wind had died to nothing more than a whisper, making the heat even more oppressive. Elias reached for his canteen, taking a small sip of the warm water, when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in this quiet afternoon tableau. It was a scream, high, desperate, and unmistakably human. Elias straightened in his saddle, every muscle suddenly tense. The sound came again, carried on what little breeze there was, from the direction of the railway tracks. He'd heard many sounds out here, coyotes, hawks, even the occasional mountain lion, but this was different. This was terror made audible. Then came another sound that made his blood run cold, the distant whistle of a train. Without conscious thought, Elias dug his heels into Buttercup's sides. The mare, sensing his urgency, burst into a gallop. The sack of oats bounced wildly behind them, and Elias leaned low over the horse's neck, urging her faster. The ground beneath them blurred, sage and rabbit brush whipping past in a dusty haze. The screaming continued, punctuated now by words he couldn't quite make out. A woman's voice, high with panic. The train whistle sounded again, closer this time, and Elias could feel the faint vibration through the earth, that telltale tremor that preceded the iron beast's arrival. Buttercup's hooves thundered across the hard-packed earth, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the still air behind them. Elias's hat flew off, caught by its stampede string around his neck, but he didn't slow to adjust it. Every second counted now. The railway tracks came into view, twin lines of steel that gleamed dully in the afternoon sun. The heat rising from them created a mirage effect, making them appear to ripple like water. And there, in the middle of those tracks, Elias saw something that made his heart nearly stop. A woman lay across the rails, her body twisted at an unnatural angle. Her dress, once perhaps blue or gray, was torn and filthy, and her hair, disheveled and matted with sweat, spread around her head like a dark halo. But it wasn't just her position that struck Elias with horror. Her wrists were bound to one rail with rough rope, her ankles to the opposite rail, stretching her body in a way that must have been agonizing. And there, clutched against her chest, wrapped in what looked like a thin piece of calico, was an infant. The baby wasn't crying. That worried Elias more than the mother's screams. The ground beneath him shook more violently now, and looking west, he could see the black smoke of the approaching locomotive, perhaps half a mile away and closing fast. The woman had seen him, her eyes wild with a mixture of hope and terror. "Please," she screamed, her voice raw. "My baby! Save my baby!" Elias threw himself from Buttercup before the mare had fully stopped. hitting the ground hard and rolling once before finding his feet. His knife was in his hand without conscious thought, the bone-handled blade his father had carried through the war. He dropped to his knees beside the woman, and the heat from the rails burned through his pants. The baby was so still, so quiet, but Elias could see the faint rise and fall of the tiny chest. Alive, then, thank God. The baby first, he said, though whether he was telling her or himself, he wasn't sure. His hands shook as he carefully cut the fabric that bound the infant to its mother's chest. The woman's arms, still tied to the rail, couldn't help, but she lifted her body as much as she could to give him access. The train whistle shrieked again, so loud now that it seemed to split the air itself. Elias could see the locomotive clearly, black iron and belching smoke, bearing down on them with unstoppable force. The rails sang with its approach, a high metallic whine that set his teeth on edge. He got the baby free, laying the bundle carefully to the side, far enough from the tracks to be safe. The infant stirred slightly, letting out a weak cry that was lost in the growing roar of the approaching train. "Now you," Elias said, turning back to the woman. The rope around her wrists was thick and had been wetted before tying, a cruel trick that made it shrink and tighten as it dried. Her wrists were raw and bleeding where she'd struggled against the bonds. The knife blade, sharp as Elias kept it, seemed to take forever to bite through the fibers. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't dare pause to wipe it away. The woman had stopped screaming now, her energy focused entirely on pulling against the ropes, trying to help him. One wrist free, Elias scrambled across her body to the other side, the locomotive now no more than 100 yards away. He could see the engineer in the cab, see him pulling frantically on the brake lever, but it was too late. These iron horses didn't stop quickly, especially not when pulling a full load. The second wrist came free, and Elias immediately went for her ankles. The woman sat up, reaching for her baby, but her feet were still firmly bound to the rail. "Not yet," Elias shouted over the deafening noise. The ground shook so violently now that he had to brace himself to keep the knife steady. 50 yards, 40. The first ankle rope parted, and Elias's blade slipped, nicking the woman's skin. She didn't even flinch, her eyes fixed on the massive cowcatcher bearing down on them. 30 yards. The last rope seemed to be made of iron itself, resisting the knife's edge. Elias sawed frantically. His whole world narrowed to the few inches of hemp fiber that stood between this woman and death. 20 yards. He could feel the heat from the locomotive's firebox, smell the coal smoke that billowed around them. The rope parted. Elias didn't think, just acted. He grabbed the woman around the waist and rolled, pulling her with him off the tracks and down the slight embankment. They hit the ground hard, Elias taking the brunt of the impact with the woman on top of him. The train roared past, so close that the wind from its passage tore at their clothes and the heat washed over them like a physical blow. They lay there for a moment, gasping in the sudden relative quiet after the train's passing. Elias could feel the woman shaking against him, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and leftover terror. Then, as if suddenly remembering, she pushed herself up. "My baby!" she cried, her voice hoarse. Elias pointed to where he'd placed the infant, safe in a patch of buffalo grass. The woman crawled more than walked to the bundle, gathering it against her chest with a sob that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. Only then did the baby truly cry, a healthy, angry wail that was the sweetest sound Elias had heard in years. He sat up slowly, his body beginning to register the various aches and pains from their desperate escape. His shirt was torn, his hands bleeding from rope burns he hadn't even noticed getting. But they were alive. All three of them were alive. The woman looked at him over the baby's head, and for the first time, he really saw her face, beneath the dirt and exhaustion. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25. Her eyes, a deep brown that reminded him of rich earth after rain, held a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. "Thank you," she whispered, the words seeming inadequate for what had just transpired. Elias nodded, not trusting his own voice just yet. He looked down the tracks where the train was disappearing into the distance, its whistle sounding once more, a mournful note that seemed to acknowledge how close death had come to claiming 2 more souls. The sun continued its relentless assault from above, and Elias knew they needed to get out of this heat, especially the baby. He stood slowly, testing his legs, then walked to where Buttercup waited patiently, grazing on a tuft of grass as if nothing unusual had happened. "My ranch isn't far," he said, turning back to the woman. "You need water and rest. Both of you do." She nodded, struggling to stand while still clutching the infant. Elias moved to help her, and together they made their way to his horse. The questions, who had done this to her and why, would have to wait. For now, getting them to safety was all that mattered, as he helped her onto Buttercup, planning to walk alongside, leading the horse. Elias glanced once more at the railroad tracks. They stretched endlessly in both directions. Innocent-looking now in the afternoon heat, but he knew he'd never hear a train whistle again without remembering this day, this moment when he'd wrestled 2 lives from the very jaws of iron death. The woman swayed slightly in the saddle, and Elias steadied her with a hand on her arm. The baby had quieted, perhaps lulled by the gentle motion as they began their journey to the ranch. Behind them, the rails continued to sing faintly in the heat, a metallic whisper that seemed to speak of secrets and cruelties that the open prairie should never have witnessed. The ranch house came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It wasn't much to look at, a simple wooden structure with a wide porch and a tin roof that caught the dying light. But to Elias, it had always meant safety and home. Now, he hoped it could offer the same to the woman who swayed precariously on Buttercup's back, clutching her infant with the last of her strength. Martha emerged from the house before they'd even reached the gate, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with the quick assessment of someone who'd weathered many storms. Her gray hair was pulled back in its usual severe bun, and she wore a flour-dusted apron over her calico dress. Despite her age, she moved with purpose, already reaching for the baby as Elias helped the woman down from the horse. "Lord have mercy," Martha breathed, cradling the infant with practiced ease. The baby stirred, letting out a weak mewl, and Martha's weathered face softened. "There now, little one, you're safe now." She looked up at Elias, her eyes full of questions, but she didn't voice them. "Not yet. Bring her inside. The guest room's made up." Elias half-carried the woman through the door, her weight barely anything against his arm. She'd stopped shaking during the ride, which worried him more than the trembling had. Shock, most likely. He'd seen it before in men after Indian raids or bad accidents. The guest room was small but clean, with a brass bed that had belonged to his mother and a quilt Martha had made during the long winters. The woman sank onto the mattress as if her strings had been cut, her eyes closing momentarily before snapping open again, wild with panic. "My baby, right here, dear," Martha said, settling into the rocking chair by the window, the infant secure in her arms. "Just need some sugar water and a proper cleaning. You rest now." The woman's eyes tracked Martha's movements, not fully trusting but too exhausted to protest. Elias lit the oil lamp on the bedside table, and in its warm glow, he could better see the damage that had been done. The rope burns on her wrists were angry and raw, some spots seeping blood. Her ankles bore similar marks, and her dress was torn in several places, revealing bruised skin beneath. "I'll fetch water and bandages," he said quietly, but the woman caught his sleeve as he turned to go. "They'll come," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They'll come looking." "Who?" Elias asked, though he kept his voice gentle. "Who did this to you?" Her eyes darted to the window, then back to her baby, and she shook her head slightly. Fear radiated from her like heat from a stove. "Later," Martha said firmly. "Questions can wait. Healing can't." Elias nodded and left to gather supplies. In the kitchen, he pumped water into a basin, his mind racing. Who would do such a thing? Tying a woman and infant to railroad tracks wasn't just murder. It was murder designed to look like an accident. No body to find after the train passed, no questions asked. Just another tragedy on the frontier. He gathered clean cloths, the bottle of carbolic Martha used for wounds, and returned to find the woman had finally released her death grip on consciousness. She lay still on the bed, her chest rising and falling in the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep. Poor thing fought it as long as she could, Martha said softly, still rocking the baby. Soon as she saw her little one was safe, she let go. Together, they worked in the familiar rhythm of those who'd tended injuries before. Elias cleaned the rope burns carefully while Martha hummed softly to keep the baby calm. The woman stirred occasionally but didn't wake, even when the carbolic must have stung fiercely. "These knots," Elias said quietly, examining the pattern of the marks. Whoever tied them knew what they were doing. "See how they're placed? Maximum pain. Minimum chance of working free." Martha's face hardened. "Takes a special kind of evil to do this to any woman, much less one with a babe." As Elias wrapped clean bandages around the woman's wrists, he noticed other things. Her hands, while work roughened, had the remnants of care, nails that had once been tended, skin that had known softer days. Her dress, beneath the tears and dirt, was of good quality cloth. This wasn't some saloon girl or woman of the camps. She'd come from somewhere respectable, had fallen far and fast. "The little one's hungry," Martha announced, "and we've no wet nurse for miles." "There's canned milk in the pantry," Elias suggested, "and I think Mother's old feeding bottle is still in the cedar chest." Martha nodded approvingly. "You remember more than I credited you for. Fetch them both, and we'll make do." While Martha tended to the baby's immediate needs, Elias found himself standing guard by the window. The sun had set fully now, and darkness crept across the prairie like spilled ink. Out there, somewhere, were the men who'd done this. The woman's warning echoed in his mind. "They'll come looking." He checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded and within easy reach. The house had good sight lines. His father had built it that way purposefully, remembering the Comanche raids of his youth. But Elias had gotten comfortable in recent years. The Indian troubles had moved further west, and the railroad had brought civilization, or at least the pretense of it. "She's settling," Martha said, and Elias turned to see the baby sucking contentedly from the old bottle. "Strong little thing, can't be more than a few weeks old." "Any idea who she might be?" Elias asked. "The mother, I mean—" Martha shook her head. "Not from around here, that's certain. I know every woman within 50 miles who's been in the family way." She paused, studying the sleeping woman's face. "She's quality, though you can see it in the bones of her face, the way she carries herself even hurt as she is." They kept vigil through the night, taking turns watching the woman and caring for the baby. Around midnight, she woke with a start, half rising from the bed before the pain in her wrists made her gasp. "Easy now," Martha soothed. "You're safe. Your baby's right here." The woman's eyes found the infant, now wrapped in a clean blanket and sleeping peacefully in Martha's arms. Some of the wild fear left her face, replaced by something closer to wonder. She's all right, perfect as a June morning," Martha assured her. "Just needed some food and warmth. Has she a name?" The woman hesitated, then whispered, "Rose. Her name is Rose." "Beautiful," Martha said. "And you, dear?" Another hesitation. Longer this time. Clara. She trailed off, as if unsure whether to give her full name. "Just Clara's fine," Elias said from his position by the window. "You don't owe us anything but getting well." Clara's eyes found his, and in the lamplight, he could see they were not quite brown as he'd first thought, but hazel, with flecks of green. "You saved us," she said simply. "Both of us. I can never—" "Anyone would have done the same," Elias said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "No," Clara said firmly. "They wouldn't. I know that now." Martha rose carefully, bringing Rose to her mother. Clara's arms came up automatically, cradling the baby with a fierce tenderness that made something in Elias's chest tighten. "You should eat," Martha said practically. Can't feed a baby if you're not keeping up your own strength. I'll warm some stew. When Martha left, a silence fell between Elias and Clara. She adjusted Rose against her chest, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her bandages. I should warn you, she said quietly, about the men who… She stopped, swallowing hard. They think they own me, and Rose, they won't just let us disappear. Are you married to one of them? Elias asked carefully. Clara's laugh was bitter. I thought I was, came all the way from St. Louis because of his letters. Sweet words about building a life together, about the opportunities out here. She looked down at Rose. When I arrived carrying his child, I found he already had a wife. Had for years. Elias felt his jaw tighten. It wasn't an uncommon story, men lying to women back east, luring them out with promises of marriage and prosperity. But most such tales didn't end with attempted murder. His family, Clara continued. They said I was a burden, an embarrassment, especially after Rose was born, a girl child, not even a boy to carry on their name. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. They decided the railroad would solve their problem, make it look like an accident. Foolish Eastern woman, wandering where she shouldn't. Do you know their names? Elias asked. Where they might be? Clara nodded slowly. The Bradshaw Ranch? About a day's ride west, near Willow Creek. Thomas Bradshaw was my husband, or so I thought. His brother Samuel was the one who… She trailed off, unable to finish. Elias knew the Bradshaw spread, a large operation that had grown wealthy, supplying beef to the railroad camps. Thomas Bradshaw had a reputation as a hard man, but fair in business. Apparently, that fairness didn't extend to his personal dealings. You're safe here, Elias said firmly. Both of you. I give you my word on that. Clara studied his face in the lamplight, and he saw her make a decision to trust him. She nodded slightly, then bent her head over Rose, who was beginning to fuss for another feeding. Martha returned with a tray of stew and bread, clucking over both mother and child like a protective hen, as Clara ate slowly, careful of her injured wrists. Elias found himself planning. The Bradshaws would indeed come looking. Men like that didn't leave loose ends, especially ones that could damage their reputation. He'd need to be ready. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm that belied the tension humming beneath the surface. Clara grew stronger, though she moved carefully, as if expecting at any moment to be torn away from this unexpected sanctuary. She helped Martha with simple tasks, folding laundry, preparing vegetables, always with Rose either in her arms or within sight in the wooden cradle Elias had brought down from the attic. It had been his own cradle once. Martha informed them, crafted by his father from a lightning-struck oak. Said it would protect the baby from storms, she explained, running her hand along the smooth wood. Seemed to work well enough. Elias found himself adjusting his daily routine around their presence. He still rode out to check the cattle and mend fences, but he never strayed far from the house, and he always kept his rifle within reach. The familiar work helped calm his mind, but his ears remained attuned to any sound that didn't belong. Hoofbeats where there should be none. Voices carried on the wind. On the fourth evening, as purple shadows stretched across the yard, Clara joined him on the porch. She moved quietly, a skill she'd developed out of necessity, he suspected. Rose slept against her shoulder, one tiny fist curled against her mother's neck. Martha's teaching me to make her biscuits, Clara said, settling carefully into the other rocking chair. She says mine are getting better, but I think she's being kind. Martha's not known for false kindness. Elias replied, If she says they're improving, they are. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. The evening was cooling, a blessed relief after the day's heat. And somewhere in the distance, a nighthawk called. I keep expecting to wake up, Clara said suddenly, to find myself back there, or worse, to discover this was all a dream while I lay dying on those tracks. Elias glanced at her profile in the dim light. It's real enough, though I understand the feeling. Sometimes the good surprises are harder to trust than the bad ones. You speak like someone who knows, Clara observed. Elias was quiet for a moment. Lost my parents to fever 5 years back, he said finally. Both within a week of each other. Kept thinking I'd wake up and hear my mother calling me to breakfast. My father complaining about the coffee being too weak. Took months before I stopped expecting them to walk through that door. I'm sorry, Clara said softly. It was their time. Elias said, they went together, which is what they would have wanted. Martha says my father wouldn't have lasted a day without my mother anyway. Rose stirred, making small sounds of discontent, and Clara adjusted her position, swaying slightly to soothe the baby. I never knew my parents, she admitted. I was raised in a foundling home in St. Louis. The sisters were kind enough, taught me to read and write, to sew and keep house. When I turned 18, they found me a position as a governess with a good family. The Bradshaws? Elias guessed. Clara shook her head. No, the Weatherbys. They were wonderful to me. Treated me almost like family. It was at their home that I met Thomas. He was there on business. Some deal about shipping beef back east. He was so charming, so attentive. He wrote me letters after he left. Such beautiful letters. Her voice had taken on a distant quality, tinged with bitterness. When Mr. Weatherby died and his widow decided to move back to Boston to live with her sister, I thought it was fate. Thomas had been asking me to come west, to marry him. I had enough saved for the train fare, and his letters painted such a picture of the life we'd build. When did you know about Rose? Elias asked carefully. Color rose in Clara's cheeks, visible even in the starlight. Not until I was already on the train. I was so naive. I thought the sickness was from the motion, the strange food, a woman in my compartment, a doctor's wife. She knew right away. She was kind about it, said these things happened and surely my husband would be overjoyed. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I was so certain Thomas would be happy. A baby to seal our new beginning. I spent the rest of the journey embroidering tiny gowns and planning how I'd tell him. The pain in her voice made Elias's chest tight. He'd seen men like Thomas Bradshaw before, smooth talkers who played with hearts like cards in a poker game, discarding them when they no longer served their purpose. What happened when you arrived? He asked, though he could guess much of it. The stage let me off in town. Thomas was supposed to meet me, but he didn't come. The hotel keeper's wife took pity on me, gave me directions to the Bradshaw ranch. I hired a wagon, spent my last coins on it. Clara's arms tightened slightly around Rose. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me. Not guilt or surprise, just annoyance, like I was a dog that had followed him home. She fell silent, and Elias didn't push. Some stories needed to be told in their own time. His wife came out then, Clara continued eventually. Margaret, she was beautiful in that hard way some women get out here. Looked at me like I was dirt on her porch. Thomas tried to send me away, offered me money to leave, but where could I go? I had nothing left, and I was already showing. So they kept you there? Elias asked, anger threading through his voice. In a shack behind the main house. Said I could work for my keep until the baby came. Then I'd have to move on. Margaret made sure I knew my place, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, mucking stalls. The ranch hands weren't allowed to speak to me. I was invisible, except when they needed someone to blame for something. Rose began to fuss in earnest, and Clara rose carefully. I should feed her. Thank you for listening. I haven't told anyone the whole story before. Clara, Elias said as she reached the door. She turned back. What made them decide to... What happened at the tracks? Her face was shadowed, but he could hear the steel in her voice. Rose happened. A girl child from the wrong woman. Margaret couldn't have children. You see, every time she looked at Rose, she saw what she couldn't have and what her husband had done. 3 nights ago, Samuel, Thomas's brother, came to the shack. Said they were taking me to town, that they'd decided to give me coach fare to California. She shifted Rose to her other shoulder. I knew they were lying. You develop a sense for danger when you live on the edge of it. But what choice did I have? Samuel had a gun, and Thomas was waiting with the wagon. They tied me up as soon as we were out of sight of the ranch. Told me it was nothing personal, just cleaning up Thomas's mess. Did they say anything else? Anything that might indicate they'd come looking? Clara considered. Samuel said something about making sure the job was done proper this time. I think they'd plan to watch, to make sure the train... She shuddered. But Thomas got nervous, said they needed to get back before they were missed. They argued about it, and finally Thomas won. Said no one could survive tied to the tracks like that, and they had alibis to maintain. Elias nodded slowly. That might give them some time. If the Bradshaws thought the deed was done, they might not come investigating immediately. But eventually, when no bodies were found, questions would arise. Get some rest, he said gently. We'll keep you safe. After Clara went inside, Elias remained on the porch, his mind turning over the information. The Bradshaws were powerful men with money and connections. If it came to a confrontation, it wouldn't just be about who was faster with a gun. It would be about who the law would believe, and Elias knew how that usually went. He was still pondering when Martha joined him, settling her bulk into Clara's vacated chair with a soft grunt. That girl's been through hell and back, she said without preamble. She has. Elias agreed. What are you planning to do about it? Elias looked at the older woman. Martha had helped raise him, had stayed when she could have found easier positions elsewhere. Her opinion mattered. Keep them safe, he said simply. Whatever that takes. Martha nodded slowly. Your father would be proud. Your mother, too. They always said you had too much conscience for your own good. Is that what this is? Conscience? Martha gave him a knowing look. You tell me. Elias Ward, you've been alone out here too long, turning away every nice girl I've tried to introduce you to. Now you're ready to take on the Bradshaw clan for a woman you met 4 days ago. It's not like that, Elias protested. But even to his own ears, it sounded weak. They tried to murder her, murder a baby. What kind of man would I be if I turned them out? I'm not suggesting you should, Martha said mildly. Just observing that you look at her when you think no one's watching. And she looks back. Elias felt heat rise in his face and was grateful for the darkness. She's been through enough without me adding complications. Maybe, Martha said, rising with effort. But complications aren't always bad things. Sometimes they're just life trying to happen. She patted his shoulder. I'll take the first watch tonight. You get some sleep. You look like you've been rode hard and put up wet. Elias wanted to protest, but Martha was already heading inside, her tone brooking no argument. He remained on the porch a while longer, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of wind through grass, the creak of the windmill by the well. Somewhere out there, the Bradshaw brothers were likely sleeping sound in their beds, confident their problem had been solved, but Elias knew their type. When doubt crept in, when they realized no bodies had been found, they'd come looking. And when they did, he'd be ready. He finally rose and headed inside, checking the locks on doors and windows, something he'd rarely bothered with before. As he passed the guest room, he could hear Clara singing softly to Rose, a lullaby in a minor key that spoke of old sorrows and fragile hopes. It was a sound that didn't belong in his house. And yet, somehow, it seemed to fill a silence he hadn't known was there. The morning was already warm when Elias rode into town, leaving Clara and Rose in Martha's capable hands. He'd resisted going at first, but they needed supplies, and maintaining normal routines might help avoid suspicion. The 10-mile ride gave him time to think, to plan for contingencies he hoped wouldn't come to pass. The town of Dry Creek wasn't much. A main street with a general store, saloon, hotel, and handful of other businesses serving the ranchers and railroad workers in the area. But it was civilization of a sort, and more importantly, it was where news and gossip collected like water in a barrel. Elias tied Buttercup to the hitching post outside Morrison's general store and stepped into the dim interior. The smell of pickle brine, leather, and coffee grounds enveloped him, a familiar combination that usually brought comfort. Today, it only sharpened his alertness. "Elias Ward," Henry Morrison called from behind the counter, his red face creasing into a smile. "Haven't seen you in near 2 weeks. Martha finally run out of coffee?" "Among other things," Elias replied, handing over his list. "How's business?" "Can't complain, though I do anyway." Henry chuckled, beginning to gather items. "Railroad's bringing in more folks every month. Had a family from Ohio come through yesterday. They're looking to buy land." Elias made appropriate sounds of interest while Henry worked. But his attention sharpened when the door chimed and another customer entered. He didn't recognize the man. Tall, weathered, with the look of a ranch hand. "Morning," the stranger said, touching his hat brim. "Wonder if you could help me. I'm looking for someone." Henry barely glanced up from measuring flour. "Oh? Who might that be?" "A woman. Young, dark-haired. Might have had a baby with her. Would have come through maybe 5 days ago." Elias kept his face carefully neutral, continuing to examine a display of ammunition as if considering a purchase. "Can't say I've seen anyone like that," Henry said after a moment's thought. "Course, I don't see everyone who passes through. What's your interest, if you don't mind my asking?" The man shifted, and Elias caught a glimpse of the gun at his hip, a newer model Colt. Well-maintained. "She's my boss's sister-in-law. Took off sudden-like after her husband died. Family's worried about her being in a delicate way and all. Not right for a woman to be wandering alone out here." It was a smooth lie, delivered with just the right amount of concern. Elias had to admire the craftsmanship of it, even as his jaw tightened. "That's a shame," Henry said, tying off the flour sack. "I'll keep an eye out. Where should I send word if she turns up?" "The Bradshaw Ranch, out by Willow Creek. Ask for Samuel Bradshaw." So, Elias thought, not just a ranch hand, but Samuel himself. Bold of him to come looking personally. But then, some jobs you couldn't trust to hired help. "I know the place," Henry said. "Hope you find her safe." Samuel's gaze swept the store, lingering briefly on Elias before dismissing him. "Appreciate it. Good day to you." After he left, Henry shook his head. "Sad business. A widow wandering with baby. Though between you and me, I've heard stories about the Bradshaw outfit. Not all of them pleasant." "That so?" Elias asked, keeping his tone casual. Henry leaned in conspiratorially. "Friend of mine worked out there last season. Said Thomas Bradshaw had an eye for the ladies, if you catch my meaning. And that wife of his, cold as a January morning and twice as bitter. My friend didn't stay long." Elias nodded, filing the information away. "Some places are like that. How much do I owe you?" As Henry tallied the bill, Elias considered his options. Samuel was sniffing around, but carefully. The story about the widow was clever, if Clara turned up dead later. There'd already be an explanation in place. Poor confused widow. Probably threw herself in front of a train in her grief. "Say, Elias," Henry said as he handed over the wrapped supplies. "You haven't seen any strangers out your way, have you? Your place being near the railroad and all?" "Just the usual travelers passing through," Elias said truthfully. After all, Clara and Rose were no longer strangers. "Why?" "Oh, no reason. Just with Samuel asking and all. Figured you might have spotted something. I'll keep my eyes open." Elias promised, hefting the supplies. "Martha wants to know if you'll have more of that fabric she liked by next month." "Should do. Tell her I'll set some aside." Elias left the store, every nerve on edge. As he loaded the supplies into his saddlebags, he spotted Samuel down the street, talking to the station agent, asking about passengers. No doubt, the man was thorough. Instead of heading straight home, Elias made one more stop. The small office of Circuit Judge Patterson doubled as a law office when the judge was in town, which wasn't often, but his clerk, Marcus Webb, was always there, and Marcus owed Elias a favor from when Elias had helped chase off some rustlers who'd been eyeing Webb's small herd. "Elias," Marcus greeted him, looking up from a pile of papers. "What brings you to the halls of justice?" "Need some legal advice." Elias said, closing the door behind him. Hypothetically speaking. Marcus's eyebrows rose. Hypothetically speaking. Of course. What's the situation? Say a woman came west to marry a man, only to find he was already married. Say she had his child, and the family decided they didn't want the embarrassment. What rights would she have? Marcus frowned, considering. Legally? Very few. If she can't prove promise of marriage, and even if she could, she'd have no claim on the man or his property. The child would be considered illegitimate, with no inheritance rights. It's an ugly situation, but common enough. And if the family tried to remove the problem? You mean harm her? Marcus's frown deepened. That would be attempted murder, of course, but proving it would be another matter, especially if the family has money and influence. Her word against theirs rarely ends well for the woman. Elias nodded. It was what he'd expected, but he'd hoped for better. What if she had protection, someone willing to stand for her? That would help, certainly, but Elias... Marcus leaned back, studying him. This sounds less hypothetical by the minute. Are you sure you want to get involved in something like this? If I don't, who will? Elias asked simply. Marcus sighed. Your father said something similar once, about a different matter. Cost him 3 head of cattle and a broken arm, if I recall correctly. But he slept sound at night. Elias countered. That he did. Marcus pulled out a sheet of paper. Tell you what, I'll write up a statement, hypothetically, that could be used to document any threats or attempts at harm. If your hypothetical woman wanted to swear to it before witnesses, it might carry some weight later. I appreciate it. Elias said. Be careful. Elias, the Bradshaws, hypothetically speaking, are not people to cross lightly. Elias left town with the legal document tucked safely in his shirt and a growing sense of urgency. Samuel's presence meant they were already looking, already spinning their web of lies. It was only a matter of time before they widened their search. The ride home seemed longer than usual, every shadow potentially hiding a threat. When the ranch finally came into view, Elias released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Everything looked normal. Martha's washing flapping on the line, smoke rising from the chimney, the cattle grazing peacefully in the near pasture. But as he dismounted, Martha appeared on the porch, and something in her posture told him normal was an illusion. We've had a visitor, she said quietly. About an hour after you left, a man asking questions. Elias's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. Where are they? Safe, hidden in the root cellar when we saw him coming. But Elias... Martha's face was grave. He knew to come here. Someone must have seen you bringing them in. Elias cursed under his breath. Of course. Nothing stayed secret long in open country. A dozen people could have spotted them on the road that day. What did you tell him? That I hadn't seen any woman or baby. That you'd gone to town for supplies and I was just the housekeeper. Don't think he believed me. But he left polite enough. Elias unloaded the supplies quickly, his mind racing. They'd lost the advantage of secrecy. Now it was only a matter of time before the Bradshaws made their next move. He found Clara in the kitchen, Rose sleeping in the cradle nearby. She looked up as he entered, and he could see she already knew. They found us, she said. It wasn't a question. They're looking, Elias corrected. That's different from finding. And looking isn't the same as taking. Clara stood slowly, moving to the window. I shouldn't have stayed. I've put you and Martha in danger. The only people who've put anyone in danger are the ones who tied you to those rails, Elias said firmly. He pulled out the document Marcus had prepared. This is a legal statement, if you're willing to swear to what happened. With Martha and me as witnesses, it creates a record. Makes it harder for them to move against you without consequences. Clara took the paper with trembling hands, reading it slowly. Would it really make a difference? Maybe, maybe not, but it's better than nothing. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Elias saw something shift in her expression. Why are you doing this? Really? It was the question Martha had asked, the question he'd been asking himself. looking at Clara now, strong despite everything, protective of her child, refusing to break under pressure that would crush most people. The answer seemed simple. "Because it's right," he said. "Because someone should have helped you long before it came to this. Because—" He paused, then pushed forward. "Because I've gotten used to having you and Rose here. The house feels different. Better." Color rose in Clara's cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Elias Ward, are you always this noble? Ask Martha. She'll tell you about all my failings in great detail." That drew a small smile, the first real one he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of who she might have been before the world tried to break her. "I'll sign your document," she said, "and I'll pray it's enough." As she bent to sign the paper, Elias watched the afternoon light play across her hair. Outside, a hawk cried, high and fierce. Storm coming, maybe, or just the bird announcing its presence to the world. Either way, Elias thought, they'd weather it. They'd have to. The days that followed took on a strange quality, like the heavy stillness before a thunderstorm. Elias went about his ranch work, but his movements were measured, deliberate. He checked the fence lines not just for breaks, but for signs of riders. He counted his cattle not just for inventory, but to ensure none had been disturbed. Every horizon line got a second look, every dust cloud scrutiny. Clara had taken to helping more around the house, as if keeping busy could ward off the danger they all felt pressing in. She'd proved surprisingly adept at the practical skills ranch life required. Her biscuits, as Martha had predicted, were indeed improving. But Elias noticed how she always kept Rose within arm's reach, how her eyes would dart to the windows at any unexpected sound. It was early morning, 5 days after Samuel's visit to town, when the waiting ended. Elias was in the barn, mucking out stalls. When he heard Buttercup's warning whinny, he moved to the door, pitchfork still in hand, and saw them. 2 riders approaching from the west, silhouetted against the rising sun. He recognized Thomas Bradshaw's bay stallion even at a distance. The man sat his horse like he owned the world. Back straight, chin high. Beside him rode Samuel on a paint mare, and Elias could see the rifle across his saddle even from here. Elias leaned the pitchfork against the wall and checked his colt, then walked out to meet them, stopping a good 20 feet from the house, close enough to talk, far enough to move if needed. "Morning, Bradshaw," he called as they reined up. "Samuel, something I can do for you?" Thomas Bradshaw was a handsome man in that polished way that spoke of good breeding and better fortune. His clothes were quality. Tailored coat, fine boots, hat that probably cost more than most cowboys made in a month. But his eyes were cold as river stones. "Ward," Thomas said, touching his hat brim in mock courtesy. "Fine morning. We're looking for something that belongs to us." "Can't say I've seen any Bradshaw cattle on my land," Elias replied evenly. Samuel shifted in his saddle, hand moving closer to his rifle. "Don't play games. Ward, we know she's here." "She," Elias kept his expression neutral. "You'll have to be more specific. Only she on this ranch besides my milk cow is Martha, and she's been here longer than I have." Thomas's jaw tightened. "My wife's sister, touched in the head. Poor thing. Ran off after her husband died. Took some family property with her. We're concerned for her welfare." "Sister-in-law, I heard in town," Elias said mildly. "Story seems to be changing some. What you heard in town is none of your concern," Samuel snapped. "Maybe not," Elias agreed. "But anyone looking for somebody on my land makes it my concern. You have any proof of this relationship? Any papers saying this woman belongs with you?" Thomas leaned forward in his saddle. "Now listen here. Ward, I'm trying to be civilized about this. That woman is confused, possibly dangerous. She's got no business dragging an infant around the territory. We're her family. We just want to take her home where she can get proper care." "Proper care," Elias repeated. "That what you call it?" The words hung in the air between them. Samuel's hand moved to his rifle, but Thomas held up a hand to stop him. "I don't know what lies she's told you," Thomas said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting would have been. But you should know she's not well. Makes up stories. Claims all sorts of wild things. Like being tied to railroad tracks? Elias asked quietly. The silence stretched taut. Thomas's face went very still, and Elias knew he'd scored a hit. That's a serious accusation, Thomas said finally. It's not an accusation, just an observation. Seems like the kind of wild story a confused woman might tell. Course, the rope burns on her wrists tell their own story. You've seen her then, Samuel said, eagerness overcoming caution. Elias didn't answer directly. I'll tell you what I told your man the other day. Haven't seen any woman matching that description, but if I did, and if she had marks on her suggesting someone had tried to harm her, well, I'd feel obligated to protect her. Any decent man would. Thomas's mask of civility was slipping. You have no idea what you're involving yourself in. Ward, that woman is a liar and worse. She came to my home under false pretenses. Tried to destroy my marriage with her schemes. My wife has been generous enough to forgive her, to offer her shelter despite everything. And this is how she repays us. By running for her life, Elias suggested. By stealing from us, Thomas corrected sharply. Taking things that don't belong to her. Like what? The clothes on her back? The baby you're so concerned about? Thomas's face flushed. That's none of your business. Maybe not, Elias said. But attempted murder is everybody's business. That's what the law calls it when you tie someone to railroad tracks. You can't prove anything, Samuel burst out, then caught himself as Thomas shot him a furious look. Can't I? Elias asked. Woman with rope burns shows up right after a mysterious incident on the railway. Engineer probably remembers having to brake hard for something on the tracks. Might even have reported it. Then there's the testimony of the woman herself, sworn and witnessed. Makes a man wonder what a real investigation might turn up. It was partly bluff. Elias didn't know if the engineer had seen or reported anything, but the Bradshaws didn't know that either. Thomas studied him for a long moment. You're making a mistake, Ward. I'm a reasonable man, but my patience has limits. That woman has something that belongs to me, and I mean to have it back. The baby? Elias asked. Because last I checked, children aren't property, even illegitimate ones. The baby is no concern of yours, Thomas said coldly. But if you're harboring fugitives, that makes you an accomplice. You could lose this ranch, maybe spend some time in prison. Is she worth that? Elias thought of Clara singing to Rose in the lamplight, of the quiet strength in her eyes, of the way the house felt alive again with their presence. I don't know any fugitives, he said. Just a woman and baby who needed help. And in my book, helping folks in need isn't a crime. Samuel's temper finally snapped. Enough of this dancing around. We know she's here. Ward, hand her over. Or what? Elias cut him off. You'll tie me to the tracks too? Your brother already let slip that you tried that once. Want to explain that to the sheriff? Samuel's hand went to his gun, but Elias was ready. His own Colt cleared leather first, aimed steady at Samuel's chest. I wouldn't, he said quietly. You're on my land, making threats. Any court in the territory would call it self-defense. Put the gun away. Samuel, Thomas ordered sharply. When his brother hesitated, he snapped. Now! Samuel holstered his weapon reluctantly, hate burning in his eyes. Thomas gathered his reins. This isn't over, Ward. One way or another, I'll get what's mine, and when I do, you'll answer for interfering. Looking forward to it, Elias said, keeping his gun steady until they'd turned their horses. As they rode away, Thomas called back over his shoulder. You might want to check your fences. Ward, been hearing about rustlers in the area. Shame if something happened to your stock. The threat was clear. Elias watched until they were out of sight, then holstered his weapon with a hand that trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from anger. He turned to find Clara standing in the doorway of the house, Rose in her arms. Her face was pale, but composed. I heard, she said simply. They're not giving up, Elias told her. I know. She stepped out onto the porch, morning light catching in her hair. I should leave. Take Rose and go somewhere they can't find us. Where? Elias asked. You have no money, No family. Where would you go that they couldn't track you? Clara's shoulders sagged slightly. I don't know, but I can't let you lose everything because of us. Martha appeared behind her. Nobody's losing anything, she said firmly. And nobody's running. We don't bow to bullies on this ranch. Martha's right, Elias said. They've shown their hand now, made threats in front of witnesses. That gives us something to work with. What do you mean? Clara asked. I mean it's time to stop playing defense. Elias said, time to take this to the law. Proper-like. Judge Patterson's due in town next week for the circuit court. We'll present your statement. Tell him about the threats made today. Get it all on legal record. And if he doesn't believe us? If the Bradshaws buy him like they've bought everyone else? Then we'll know where we stand, Elias said. But Judge Patterson, straight as they come, knew my father, rode with him in the Rangers. He'll listen. Clara looked down at Rose, who was gurgling contentedly, unaware of the storm swirling around her. All right, she said finally. We'll try it your way. But Elias, if it doesn't work, we'll face that when we come to it, he said. Right now, let's focus on keeping everyone safe. I'll ride the fence lines, make sure they haven't already started their mischief. Martha, keep the shotgun handy. Clara, I'll help Martha, she said, and I'll be ready. As Elias saddled Buttercup for his patrol, he reflected on how quickly life could change. A week ago, his biggest concern was fixing the fence and getting the cattle to market. Now he was preparing for what might be a siege, protecting a woman and child who'd somehow become essential to him. But as he rode out, rifle across his saddle, he felt no regret. Some things were worth fighting for, and if Thomas Bradshaw wanted a war, Elias would give him one. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the dew and promising another hot day. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, a lonely, mournful note that reminded them all how this had started. But Elias was thinking about how it might end, and for the first time since finding Clara on those tracks, he allowed himself to hope it might end well. The confrontation came 3 days later, just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Elias had spent the afternoon repairing a section of fence that had been mysteriously damaged, clean cuts that no animal could have made. He was leading Buttercup back to the barn when he spotted the dust cloud approaching from the main road. This time, they hadn't come alone. Thomas and Samuel Bradshaw rode at the head of 4 other men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of hired guns. Elias recognized one, Jake Murdoch, a man with a reputation for dirty work and few scruples about how he earned his pay. Elias quickly tied Buttercup in the barn and grabbed his Winchester from the saddle. He could see Martha through the kitchen window, and knew she'd spotted the riders too. Good. She'd know what to do. He walked out to meet them, rifle held casual but ready, stopping at the gate to his property. 6 against 1 weren't good odds, but the gate created a natural choke point. They'd have to come through 1 or 2 at a time if shooting started. That's far enough, Elias called when they were 30 feet away. State your business. Thomas touched the brim of his hat mockingly. Why, Ward, such a poor welcome. And here we've come all this way to make you a generous offer. I'm listening, Elias said, though he kept his attention on the hired men. Murdoch especially worried him. The man's hand rested too casually on his pistol grip. I'm prepared to buy this ranch. Thomas announced, cash money, twice what it's worth. You could start over anywhere you want, maybe California. I hear the weather's nice there. Ranch isn't for sale, Elias replied. Everything's for sale at the right price. Samuel interjected, you just need proper motivation. One of the hired men snickered at that, and Elias felt his temper flare, but he kept his voice level. The answer's no, now. Unless you have other business, I'll ask you to move along. Thomas's facade of civility finally cracked. You're protecting a woman who belongs to me, Ward. She's carrying proof of her shame, proof that could destroy my reputation, my marriage, everything I've built. I won't let some 2-bit rancher stand in my way. Seems to me you destroyed your own reputation. Elias said. Man who can't keep his marriage vows doesn't have much reputation worth protecting. Thomas's face darkened. Last chance. Ward, take the money and ride away. Or stay and face the consequences. I'll take the consequences, Elias said firmly. Murdoch spoke for the first time. Shame to die over some used goods. Ward, she must be something special in the dark. The insult to Clara burned through Elias's control. His rifle came up, aimed at Murdoch's chest. Get off my land, all of you, now. Or what? Murdoch sneered. You'll shoot us all? Even you ain't that fast. Maybe not, a new voice said from behind Elias. But two of us might manage it. Elias didn't turn, but relief flooded through him as he recognized the voice. Tom Mackenzie, his nearest neighbor, stepped into view carrying a shotgun. The older rancher positioned himself beside Elias, weapon trained on the group. Tom, Thomas said, surprise evident in his voice. This isn't your fight. Man threatens my neighbor. Makes it my fight. Mackenzie replied. Besides, never did like bullies, or men who'd harm women and babies. You don't know what you're talking about. Samuel protested. Know enough. Mackenzie said, know about the woman Elias pulled off the train tracks. Know about the rope burns. Know you boys have been asking questions, making threats. Don't take a genius to add it up. Another voice came from the left. 3 of us now. Jim Santos, who ran the small ranch to the south, emerged from behind the barn with his rifle. He was young, not yet 25, but steady. You boys planned this? Thomas demanded. Didn't have to, Mackenzie said. When we heard you were hiring guns, we figured you might try something stupid. Folks around here look out for each other. The odds had shifted. 3 men in defensive positions against 6 in the open. The hired guns were doing their own calculations, and Elias could see they didn't like the math. But Samuel wasn't ready to back down. This is kidnapping. That woman. His words cut off as Clara herself stepped onto the porch. She held Rose in one arm and Martha's shotgun in the other, handling it with surprising competence. I'm no one's property. Samuel Bradshaw, she called, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. Not yours, not your brother's. I came west of my own free will, deceived by lies. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, and I left because you tried to murder me and my child. Lies, Thomas shouted, but his protest sounded hollow. Clara continued, standing tall despite the weight of what she carried. You tied me to those tracks. You and Samuel left me and Rose to die because you couldn't bear the shame of what you'd done. Well, I won't be ashamed anymore, and I won't run. You heard the lady, Elias said. She's made her choice. Now make yours. Ride away and don't come back, or face the consequences of what you've done. For a moment, the tableau held. 7 men with guns drawn, a woman with a baby and a shotgun. The setting sun painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Then Murdoch broke the silence. This ain't worth dying for, Bradshaw. You want the woman that bad. Use the law. Thomas's face was a mask of fury, but he could count as well as anyone. This isn't over, he said, echoing his earlier threat. You think you've won something here? I have friends, influence. I'll see you ruined. Ward. All of you. Maybe, Elias allowed. But you'll do it from a distance. Show your face on my land again, and we'll finish this conversation with lead instead of words. Thomas yanked his horse's head around savagely. Mount up, he ordered his men. As they wheeled their horses, he looked back one more time. His gaze found Clara on the porch, and something ugly passed across his features. You were nothing when I found you, he called to her. Nothing but a servant girl with pretensions. You're nothing still. Clara's chin came up. I'm a mother, she said quietly, but her voice carried, I'm a survivor, and I'm free of you. That's everything. The Bradshaw party rode away in a cloud of dust and wounded pride. Elias and the others held their positions until the riders were well out of range, then slowly lowered their weapons. Appreciate the help, Elias said to his neighbors. Mackenzie spat tobacco juice and grinned. Been wanting to take Thomas Bradshaw down a peg for years. Man thinks money makes him king of the territory. They'll be back, Santos warned. Maybe not with guns, but they'll try something. Let them try, Elias said. We'll be ready. The two neighbors took their leave, promising to keep watch and spread the word about what had happened. As they rode off, Elias turned to find Clara still on the porch, the shotgun now hanging loose at her side. You all right? He asked. She nodded slowly. I've never pointed a gun at anyone before. I wasn't even sure I could shoot if I had to. Could you have? Elias asked gently. Clara looked down at Rose, who had slept through the entire confrontation. To protect her? Yes, without hesitation. Martha appeared in the doorway, taking the shotgun from Clara's unresisting hands. Come inside, both of you. Supper's getting cold, and we've all had enough excitement for one day. As they moved inside, Clara caught Elias's arm. They knew where to find me. They'll use the law next, won't they? Try to take Rose legally? They'll try, Elias admitted. But Judge Patterson's due next week. We'll get your story on record first. And Clara, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Thomas showed his true colors today. In front of witnesses, Murdoch and those others. They're hired guns, but they're not stupid. They'll talk. Story will spread about what really happened. Will it matter? Clara asked, doubt clear in her voice. Truth always matters, Martha said firmly from the kitchen. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Now sit down and eat. That baby needs a strong mother, not one who's half-starved with worry. They ate quietly, the events of the day settling over them like dust. But there was something different in the air, too. A sense of solidarity, of lines drawn and positions taken. They were no longer just three people brought together by circumstance. They were a unit now, forged by shared danger and mutual trust. As night fell, Elias took his rifle and went out to walk the perimeter. Old habits from his ranger days surfacing. The stars were coming out, bright in the clear sky, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. He found Clara on the porch again, Rose finally asleep in her arms. She'd wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. Can't sleep, he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Too much to think about, she admitted. I keep wondering if I should have stayed quiet, disappeared somewhere. It would have been safer for everyone. Maybe, Elias said, but you'd have been running forever. And Rose would have grown up never knowing who she was or where she came from. That's no life. Clara was quiet for a moment. I told Thomas I was nothing when he found me. That wasn't entirely true. I had dreams once. Small ones, maybe. But mine. A home. A family. A place to belong. Those aren't small dreams, Elias said softly. She turned to look at him in the starlight. What are your dreams? Elias Ward. The question caught him off guard. Used to be just keeping the ranch going, honoring what my parents built. Lately, he paused, then pushed forward. Lately, I've been thinking there's more to life than just surviving. Such as living, he said simply. Having something worth coming home to besides an empty house. Someone to share the good days and weather the bad ones with. Their eyes met and held. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Not quite a declaration, but a recognition of possibility. I should go in, Clara said finally, though she made no move to rise. Rose will want feeding soon. In a minute, Elias agreed, equally reluctant to break the spell. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal battles, possible retaliation, the long fight to secure Clara and Rose's freedom. But tonight, for just a moment, they could pretend they were simply a man and woman sitting on a porch, sharing the quiet end of a day. It wasn't peace, exactly, but it was close enough. The days following the confrontation passed with surprising tranquility. The Bradshaws seemed to have retreated, at least temporarily, and life at the ranch found a new rhythm. Clara no longer jumped at every sound, and Rose had begun to smile. Real smiles that crinkled her tiny eyes and made everyone in the house stop whatever they were doing to admire her. Elias found himself looking forward to the evenings more than he ever had before. After supper, they'd often sit together in the main room, Martha knitting, Clara mending or reading from one of the few books in the house, and Elias working on ledgers or cleaning tack. It was domestic in a way that should have felt foreign to him, but instead felt like something he'd been missing without knowing it. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, Clara looked up from the shirt she was mending, one of his. Elias noticed with an odd warmth in his chest. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what happens next." Martha's knitting needles paused. Elias set down his ledger. They'd all been thinking about it, but no one had wanted to be the first to voice it aloud. "Judge Patterson will be here in 3 days." Elias said, "We'll present your statement. Get everything official. After that, I should move on." Clara finished. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "Imposed?" Martha's voice was sharp. "Child, you've been helping with everything from cooking to mending to tending the garden. If that's imposing, I'll take more of it." Clara smiled faintly. "You know what I mean? This situation, it can't continue indefinitely. People will talk. People are already talking," Elias said. "Have been since the day I brought you here. I don't much care what they say. But your reputation—" "My reputation is my own concern," Elias interrupted. "And right now, it's telling me that sending you and Rose out into the world alone would be the worst kind of mistake." Clara's hands stilled on the mending. "What are you saying?" Elias stood, suddenly restless. He walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "I'm saying that maybe there's a solution that works for everyone. A way to keep you and Rose safe, permanent-like, and stop the wagging tongues at the same time." The room was very quiet, except for the rain and the pop of wood in the stove. "Elias Ward," Martha said slowly, "are you proposing what I think you're proposing?" He turned from the window. Clara was staring at him, hazel eyes wide, the forgotten shirt clutched in her hands. "I'm not much for fancy speeches," Elias said, "but these past weeks, having you and Rose here, it's changed things, changed me. The house feels alive again, like a home instead of just a place to sleep between work." He moved closer, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "I know it's not the courtship you probably dreamed of, and I know you've had promises broken before, but I'm offering something real, a partnership, a family, a place where Rose can grow up safe and loved, where you can be yourself without fear or shame." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Elias, you don't have to—" "I'm not doing this out of pity or obligation," he said firmly. "I'm doing it because when I think about you leaving, it feels like the house would go dark again. Because when Rose smiles, I want to be there to see it. Because when you look at me like you're looking now, I forget about everything else except how much I want to keep you both safe and happy." "Pretty speech for a man who claims he's not good at them," Clara whispered. "Must be the company inspiring me," Elias replied, managing a smile despite his nervousness. Martha cleared her throat. "Well, don't keep the man on his knee all night, girl. Ranch work is hard enough without adding bruised kneecaps to it." That broke the tension, and Clara laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Elias Ward, I'll marry you." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips in a gesture that surprised them both. "We'll do it right," he promised. "When the circuit preacher comes through, make it official and proper." "Actually," Martha said, setting aside her knitting with a satisfied air, "Reverend Morrison is due next week. Same time as the judge. We could have a proper wedding right here." "That soon?" Clara asked, looking uncertain again. "Why wait?" Elias asked, still holding her hand. "Unless you need time to be sure." "No," Clara said quickly. "No, I'm sure. It's just, I never imagined, after everything." "That's the thing about life," Martha said wisely. "It has a way of surprising us. Now, we'll need to get you a proper dress. Mine from '58 should fit with some alterations." As the women began discussing wedding preparations, Elias felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years, but underneath it was steel-hard determination. The Bradshaws would certainly see this marriage as another provocation. He'd need to be ready. The next morning brought unexpected visitors: Tom Mackenzie and his wife Ellen, along with Jim Santos. Word had already spread about the engagement. "Came to offer congratulations," Mackenzie said, pumping Elias's hand. "About time you settled down." Ellen immediately whisked Clara away to discuss wedding preparations, leaving the men on the porch. "Also came to warn you," Santos said once the women were out of earshot. "Bradshaw's been in town, talking to everyone who'll listen, saying the woman bewitched you, that she's a gold digger. Worse things." "Let him talk," Elias said. "He's also been visiting the land office," Mackenzie added, "asking questions about your deed, water rights, that sort of thing. Man's looking for leverage." Elias frowned. His father had been meticulous about paperwork, but that didn't mean there couldn't be some obscure challenge. "And there's more," Santos continued reluctantly. "He's sent for some lawyer from Austin, supposed to be here when the judge arrives." "For the custody hearing?" Elias asked. "That'd be my guess. He wants the baby." "Elias." Seems his wife can't have children, and he's figuring to claim Rose as his legitimate daughter. "Over my dead body," Elias said flatly. "Might come to that," Mackenzie warned. "Man's desperate. Desperate men do desperate things." The wedding preparations continued despite the looming threats. Ellen Mackenzie and several other neighbor women descended on the ranch, turning it into a flurry of cooking, cleaning, and decorating. Clara bloomed under their attention, the haunted look finally fading from her eyes. The night before the wedding, Elias found her in the garden, Rose sleeping in a basket beside her as she tended the roses that gave the baby her name. "Second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench his mother had loved. "No," Clara said immediately. "Just thinking how strange life is. A month ago, I was ready to die. Now," she gestured at the house, lit warmly from within, full of the sounds of preparation and friendship. "Now you're stuck with a stubborn rancher and his bossy housekeeper," Elias finished. "Lucky me," Clara said, and the way she said it made clear she meant every word. "Clara," Elias said, suddenly serious, "tomorrow, when we stand before the preacher, I want you to know you're not just getting a protector or a provider. You're getting a man who—" He paused, then pushed through. "Who loves you? Who loves Rose? Who wants to build something real with both of you?" Clara turned to face him fully, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I know," she said softly. "And you're getting a woman who never expected to love again, but finds herself doing exactly that. You gave me hope when I had none. Elias, you gave me back my life." They sat together in the gathering dusk, hands clasped, watching the first stars appear. Tomorrow would bring challenges: the wedding, the judge, the custody hearing, whatever schemes the Bradshaws were hatching. But tonight, they had this moment of peace, this promise of a future together. "We should go in," Clara said eventually. "Martha threatened dire consequences if I'm not well rested tomorrow." "Martha threatens dire consequences for most things," Elias observed. "It's how she shows affection." As they walked back to the house, Rose stirring in her basket, Elias felt the rightness of it all. His parents would have approved. He thought his mother would have loved Clara's quiet strength, and his father would have respected her courage. "Elias," Clara said as they reached the porch, "thank you for everything, for taking a chance on us." "Thank you," he replied, "for giving me something worth fighting for." Inside, the house was warm and bright, full of neighbors who'd become friends, all united in celebrating new beginnings. Martha bustled about, ordering everyone around with the authority of a general, but her eyes were suspiciously bright when she looked at Elias and Clara together. "Early to bed, both of you," she commanded. "Big day tomorrow. Reverend Morrison likes to start early, and the judge will be here by noon." As Elias headed to his room, his last night in it alone, he realized with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. He paused at Clara's door. Sleep well, he said. Tomorrow, everything changes. For the better, Clara said firmly. No matter what comes after, for the better. And standing there in the lamplight, looking at the woman who'd crashed into his life in the most dramatic way possible and somehow made it complete, Elias knew she was right. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, hope was enough. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that promised relief from the usual heat. Elias stood beneath the old cottonwood tree, its branches spreading wide enough to shade the small gathering of neighbors and friends who'd come to witness the ceremony. He wore his father's black suit, carefully preserved by Martha and altered to fit. Beside him, Tom Mackenzie stood as his best man, looking almost as nervous as Elias felt. Reverend Morrison, a thin man with kind eyes and a voice that carried despite its softness, had arrived just after sunrise. He'd listened to their story without judgment, only nodding thoughtfully when Elias explained the circumstances that had brought them together. God works in mysterious ways, he'd said simply. What matters is the love and commitment you bring to this union. Now, as Martha began humming the wedding march, all heads turned toward the house. The door opened, and Elias felt his breath catch. Clara emerged wearing Martha's wedding dress, cream-colored silk that had yellowed slightly with age, but still held its elegance. Ellen Mackenzie had worked miracles with the alterations, and the dress fit Clara as if it had been made for her. Her dark hair was pinned up with small wildflowers woven through it, and she carried a simple bouquet of prairie roses from the garden. But it was her face that held Elias transfixed. Gone was the haunted, frightened woman he'd pulled from the railroad tracks. In her place stood someone radiant with hope and happiness, her hazel eyes finding his across the yard and holding steady. Jim Santos escorted her, having volunteered for the honor. As they approached, Elias could see Rose in Martha's arms, the baby wearing a tiny white gown that one of the neighbor women had hurriedly sewn. When Clara reached him, taking his hands in hers, Elias forgot about the crowd, about the threat still hanging over them, about everything except the woman before him. Dearly beloved, Reverend Morrison began, his voice carrying across the gathering. We are gathered here in the sight of God and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The familiar words washed over them as the sun climbed higher, filtering through the cottonwood leaves to dapple them with light and shadow. When it came time for the vows, Elias spoke clearly, meaning every word. I, Elias, take you, Clara, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. Clara's voice was softer but no less certain. I, Clara, take you, Elias, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Reverend Morrison asked for the rings, Elias produced 2 simple gold bands, his parents' rings, which Martha had kept safe all these years. These rings belong to good people, he said quietly, for Clara's ears alone. People who knew how to build something lasting. I hope we can do the same. Clara's eyes shimmered as he slipped the ring onto her finger. We will, she whispered back. By the power vested in me by God in the territory of Texas, Reverend Morrison proclaimed, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle, a promise more than a passion. But the cheer that went up from the assembled guests was anything but restrained, as they turned to face their friends as husband and wife. Martha stepped forward with Rose. Seems fitting, she said, transferring the baby to Clara's arms. To make this complete, Elias put his arm around both Clara and Rose. And for a moment, the 3 of them stood there, a family formed not by blood but by choice and circumstance and love. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Tables had been set up under the trees, laden with food the neighbor women had prepared. There was music. Mackenzie played fiddle, and one of the Santos boys had brought a guitar. People danced on the hard-packed earth, and even Martha was convinced to take a turn around the makeshift dance floor. But as the afternoon wore on, Elias noticed riders approaching from the east. His hand moved instinctively to where his gun would normally be, then remembered he'd left it inside for the ceremony. Judge Patterson arrived first, a dignified man with the silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came his clerk, Marcus Webb, who nodded to Elias with a meaningful look, and behind them, Thomas and Samuel Bradshaw rode in with their lawyer, a thin man in a city suit who looked uncomfortable on horseback. They stopped at the edge of the gathering, taking in the wedding celebration with expressions of barely controlled fury. Judge Patterson dismounted and approached Elias with an extended hand. "Congratulations on your marriage. Ward, I apologize for the timing, but I understand there's a matter requiring immediate attention." "There is, Your Honor," Elias replied, "though the Bradshaws might see it differently now that Clara is my wife." Thomas dismounted stiffly, his face flushed with anger. "This changes nothing," he declared. "That woman has my child, and you'll demand nothing on my property." Elias cut him off. "And you'll watch your tongue about my wife." Judge Patterson raised a hand. "Gentlemen, please, let's conduct this properly. Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" They convened in the main room of the house. Judge Patterson, his clerk, the Bradshaws and their lawyer, Elias and Clara with Rose, and Martha as witness. The wedding guests remained outside, but Elias knew they were watching, ready to intervene if needed. "Now then," Judge Patterson said, settling into Elias's chair, "Mr. Bradshaw, state your claim." The lawyer, who introduced himself as Cornelius Ashford from Austin, stood pompously. "My client asserts parental rights over the infant known as Rose. As the biological father, he seeks custody and has the means to provide for the child's upbringing." "I see," the judge said. "And you, Mrs. Ward, what say you to this claim?" Clara stood, still in her wedding dress, Rose quiet in her arms. "Thomas Bradshaw deceived me with promises of marriage, knowing full well he already had a wife. When I arrived carrying his child, he and his brother attempted to murder us both by tying us to the railroad tracks. I have the scars to prove it, and my husband witnessed the immediate aftermath." "Lies!" Samuel burst out, but the judge silenced him with a look. "These are serious accusations." Judge Patterson said, "Do you have proof?" Elias produced the signed statement Clara had made days earlier. "This was witnessed by myself and Martha Green, Your Honor. Additionally, the engineer of the westbound train on that day reported having to brake for an obstruction on the tracks. The timing matches exactly." Marcus Webb spoke up. "I've taken the liberty of obtaining that report. Your Honor." He handed over a paper. The engineer states he saw what appeared to be a person on the tracks, though by the time the train stopped and he went back to investigate, they were gone. Judge Patterson read through all the documents carefully. The room was silent except for the distant sounds of the wedding celebration continuing outside. "Mr. Bradshaw," the judge said finally, "these are damning allegations. What say you?" Thomas's lawyer tried to interject, but Thomas himself stood. "That woman is a liar and a schemer. She came to my home under false pretenses, tried to destroy my marriage. My wife and I were willing to show Christian charity, to help her despite her shame. And this is how she repays us? By not dying when you tried to kill her," Elias asked coldly. "Enough." Judge Patterson said, "I've heard enough, Mr. Bradshaw. Regardless of any biological connection you may have to this child, your actions, if these allegations are true, and the evidence suggests that they are, forfeit any claim you might make. Furthermore, Mrs. Ward is now a married woman, and her husband has indicated his intention to raise the child as his own." "This is outrageous," the lawyer sputtered. "We'll appeal." You'll do nothing," Judge Patterson said sternly. "And if I were you, Mr. Bradshaw, I'd be more concerned about potential criminal charges than custody claims. Attempted murder is a hanging offense in this territory." Thomas went pale. Samuel's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped as Tom Mackenzie and Jim Santos appeared in the doorway, armed and watchful. "I believe we're done here." The judge said, "Mr. Bradshaw, you and your party will leave immediately. If you make any further attempts to harass the Ward family, I'll personally see you prosecuted to the full extent of the law." For a moment, the room teetered on the edge of violence. Then Thomas grabbed his brother's arm. "Come on," he said through gritted teeth. "This isn't over," he added to Elias. "Yes," Elias said firmly. "It is." After the Bradshaws left, Judge Patterson stood. "I'll file a formal ruling when I return to town. The child is legally yours, Mr. and Mrs. Ward. May she bring you joy." He paused at the door. "And congratulations again on your marriage. Your father would be proud. Elias." As the judge departed, Clara sank into a chair, trembling with relief. "Is it really over?" "The legal part is," Elias said, kneeling beside her. "The Bradshaws might try something else, but they've lost their main weapon. Rose is ours, legally and properly." "Ours," Clara repeated, testing the word. "Our daughter." Martha cleared her throat emotionally. "Well, don't just sit there. You've got wedding guests to attend to. Plenty of time for relief later." They returned to the celebration, which had taken on an even more joyous tone with the news of the judge's ruling, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Elias and Clara stood together watching their guests. "No regrets?" Elias asked quietly. Clara shifted Rose to one arm and took his hand with the other. "How could I regret the best day of my life?" In the distance, the evening train whistled, the same sound that had started their journey. But now it was just background noise to their new life together. The rails still gleamed in the dying light, but they no longer represented danger or death. They were simply another part of the landscape, like the cottonwood tree or the distant mountains. "Dance with me," Clara said suddenly. "Here? Now?" "Here, now. Our first dance as husband and wife." So as the wedding guests smiled and the music played and baby Rose gurgled contentedly between them, Elias and Clara Ward danced in the dusty yard of their ranch. It wasn't elegant or graceful, but it was theirs. And in that moment, with his wife in his arms and their daughter safe between them, Elias knew that sometimes the best things in life came from the worst circumstances. Clara had been tied to the rails, but she'd broken free, and in doing so, had freed him as well. The stars were coming out, one by one, as they'd done every night since creation. But tonight they seemed to shine a little brighter, blessing a family that had found each other against all odds and chosen to face whatever came next together.